right, everybody. I got to say this smoothly, quietly. I got a guy who's going to talk about civil rights. Civil rights. What is civil rights? What's the civil rights fight? What's the movement? And we're going to go back a little ways and we're going to plug in. I know he's going to be able to blow your mind with this good Black history. I'm Anthony Brogdon, and oh my God, this is not the first time this gentleman has come on the channel. Oh, I got a feeling he like what I'm doing. and he enjoys this. This is good because this will give you a chance, him and the guests and you, the lookers and the viewers, to hear from people who you might not ordinarily hear it from. How about that? That might be an angle. And I enjoy doing it. Did you see the video I got on the channel with the guy who says his great grandfather was in the KKK? He believed he killed the guy. And then he wrote a book about this. Watch that video.
I will.
Did you see the one, the video I got with the lady who is Gullah Geechee?
I did see that.
She tries to explain the Gullah Geechee. Did you see the one I did with the lady in Frogtown, South Carolina, who said they built a 9-foot wall to separate the neighborhood? Watch that video. Did you see the one where I interviewed the lady who they have a cottage inn, little small motel on Martha's Vineyards that's over 110 years old?
Wow.
Watch that video. Oh, we're coming at you straight. Chaser, straight, no chaser. We're giving it to you. Everybody, if you know or don't know, I'm having my own Black History Festival. Little old me, I ain't little no more. Like with people like I got the guest on my show. So come down to Kansas City, Kansas, Memorial Day weekend. Go to my website, businessintheblack.net. I'm not gonna say no more because I want him to come on so we can get it on. But before I do that, I got a couple more things to do. And that is, I got my own movie, everybody. I want you to watch it. It's streaming on Amazon. It's called Business in the Black. It's good, I'm telling you. I tell you a short story. I showed it in Cincinnati, Ohio, and we got towards the end of the movie and the projector lost power. The lady said, I'm gonna stay here to whatever y'all gotta do. I wanna see the end of it. I'll never forget that. That happened at one of the showings. And my movie is streaming on Amazon. Slaves who went to college and Black millionaires in the 1800s. I got the book too. A Black business book, over 200 facts. It's very similar to the movie, but it's more thorough. And one of the series of facts that I have in here is about civil rights. I'm giving you a lead in on my guest because watch, we're gonna go around this topic. Oh, watch, I got something for him. I'm brewing inside. And so that's in my book. Get your copy of my book. You get a copy, I autograph it. One day, 10 years, 15, 20 years, and the show done blew up big by then, you'd be like, hey, I got a book from him, supported the cause. I appreciate it. And then lastly, as you know, my friends, mostly I use this term strong a lot, which stands for strength, tenacity, resilience, and a sense of oneness, nobility, and grace, nobility and grace. Now, strong, which is a definition for my guest. Come on, strong man, introduce yourself. Thank you for being on Strong Inspirations once again.
Once again, it is my pleasure to be here, Anthony. I love what you do. I love the energy you bring, and it's formats like this that keep me energized and passionate about sharing Black history with as many people as I possibly can. So thank you.
Yeah, okay, on that note, everybody, you can learn about him in his previous video. We ain't going back over that, but on that note, what makes you feel good at the end of the day? What's a good day for you? In the classroom, talking to somebody, and from that perspective of what you do. I know it could be other things. We ain't going into that. But on that note,
we're gonna keep this PG-13.
Yes.
Right? What makes me feel good at the end of the day is having a student tell me that they never understood something until a lecture or a class. having a student, for me, tell me that now, because of a class, because of a topic, whatever the case may be, to say that I can now put this together and I see how the past informs the present in ways that I never would have thought about.
Okay.
That's the purpose of education.
I
The purpose
got
of
you.
education is having people with that light bulb moment go off and say, wait a minute, you mean to tell me ...
Yes.
And helping people grow academically and
Yes.
helping them understand the importance of civil rights history, of Southern history, of our nation's history. For me, that's a good day. It's a cliche, but you know, you change the world one person at a time.
Yes.
That's what it's about.
Now, is there okay, like let's say this. If you were a comedian, you know how a comedian have his go-to joke.
Yeah.
You know, he know that if I tell that joke, I'm gonna get him. Do you have a story like that? Not civil rights or otherwise, that's your go-to story?
Yeah, I have a go-to fact, and it's
Okay.
it's about civil rights in Florida. Anthony, when people think about Florida, they tend to think that Florida is Mickey Mouse and Florida is the Space Coast and Florida's the Sunshine State, right?
Yes.
It's Miami, baby.
Yes.
We got it's different here. It's not the South.
Yes.
That's the concept of Florida exceptionalism. That Florida is somehow so different that it's not like the rest of the South. Or not like the rest of the country. Well,
okay, let me stop you there. Let me show you how much I know. Now, Florida had that Spanish influence and was separate from America. That's got something to do with that, right?
Yes, it does. You're absolutely right. It wasn't part of the original 13 British North American colonies.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Slavery in Florida, particularly St. Augustine, where I'm currently located, slavery was different here, much different than it was under British rule. So yeah, all of that leads into, well, Florida's different. Did Florida have a civil rights movement? Was Florida like the Deep South? And the go-to stat that I always use, Anthony, is that between 1880 and 1930, Florida led the nation in per capita lynchings. It was more dangerous for an African American to live in the state of Florida between 1880 and 1930 than it was for them to live in Mississippi.
Really?
Yes, sir.
All right. But before we go into that, because you got me on the downer, so to speak, and with that incredible fact, I wouldn't have known that. Let me go back before that. Because slavery, you said, was different. It was different how?
It was different how, in that the Spanish had a different view of slavery than the English did. And it's primarily because of the Catholic Church. Spain was a Catholic country, and it had to follow the dictates of the Pope.
I got you.
Under the Catholic Church, slave owners under Spanish control had to recognize, for lack of a better term, the soul of the slave. The slave was seen as a full person. And with that acknowledgement, the slaves had privileges and freedoms that they did not have under British rule. And what I mean by that is that slaves were allowed to marry. It was a religious right. Slaves.
And when you say marry, that's in the courthouse or in the that's a document signed.
That is a document signed. Same thing with baptism. Slave owners under Spanish rule had to give religious instruction to their slaves. So literacy rates among slaves in Spanish Florida, much higher. Most importantly, if you look at, particularly in St. Augustine, we bordered the English colony of Georgia. In St. Augustine, the Spanish king made it so that if a fugitive slave reached Spanish territory, to earn their freedom, all they had to do was two things: convert to Catholicism and join the militia. Usually it was a 2-year period, Anthony. You join the Spanish militia and fight against the British, who, by the way, still might have your relatives enslaved. For 2 years, you convert, you become a Catholic, and you'll be free at the end of those 2 years.
Yeah.
So slavery was different. And as a matter of fact, in St. Augustine,
Now, hold on, let me stop you there.
Oh,
How about this
yeah.
question? Does that happen in 1619? Is that at the beginning or towards the end of slavery, or that happens from day one when they started doing it?
1565 is when St. Augustine was settled. So from the 1500s, we have a different kind of slavery that emerges here. It's often said, I've heard it said in St. Augustine, that when the Pilgrims had the first Thanksgiving, St. Augustine was undergoing an urban renewal. We were an established colony from the early 1500s, like I said, from 1565.
Okay, let me get you right here then. How about that? How about this? You all were first because those ships coming from the Caribbean came to Florida first?
They don't go to Florida first. They go to the Caribbean first. And remember, that's Spanish. Well, from the Caribbean, they go north to Spanish Florida. And
that's what I mean. They come to Florida after the Caribbean.
Yes.
So that's why Florida is first, because it's the closest spot to them.
That's exactly right.
All right, I got you there.
That's exactly right. Now, one of the interesting things, Anthony, for students of Black history is that one of the first settlements of semi-free, both free Blacks, slaves, natives, existed right here, not far from St. Augustine. About a mile north of the city is a place called Fort Mose, M-O-S-E. Yes. And Fort Mose was a fort of free Blacks, slaves, natives, about 100, who defended the city of St. Augustine from a British invasion from the north.
Yes.
And they, like I said, it was the first multiracial free settlement established in North America.
Yes, right. All right. I say that, yes, because I got a gentleman, everybody, the channel is jamming, who talks about Fort Mose. Okay, so now let me ask you this. Does that mean, are you saying because they allowed the slaves to have those liberties, the marriage, 2 years, change religion, did that mean that they were less harsh on them than they were in southern spots?
What I will say is it's hard to say less brutal. I mean, because slavery, if you own a human being, the harshness is you can sell them at any time. However, the slavery that existed in Spanish Florida was not the plantation-based model.
Okay.
In other words, slaves in Spanish Florida tended to be leased out. They're not developing a single cash crop, right? Of the coast, the Georgia Sea Islands and the Carolina Sea Islands, they're cultivating rice.
Yes.
Here, they are skilled craftsmen. They are blacksmiths.
Okay.
And they are carpenters.
Okay.
And the Spanish would often lease them out. Slaves could work on their own time. They could purchase their own freedom. They marry free people. So slavery.
Don't stop you right there. That's a good one. Yeah. They being enslaved, married free people?
Yes.
That's what you were saying. Okay.
Yes. It was not uncommon for, look, the Spanish soldiers that were here, the gendered balance was that there were many more men than there were women. Slave women, indigenous women. There were, as I often say it, there were degrees of freedom in Spanish Florida that you did not see in the English colonies, right? So slavery, was it better than? It was just much different than plantation-based model that emerged in further north in the English colony.
Yeah, and that picking cotton just on the effort of the work itself has got to be a whole lot more brutal in that, I'm gonna use that term again, than being a carpenter or a painter or some of those things that they lent out, the crafts that they would allow them to learn.
And the other thing, Anthony, is if you're a skilled craftsman, you have some degree of literacy.
Yeah, right. I'm sure.
Huge difference.
Okay, I'm sure. So now Florida has that distinction, and this, we're gonna tie this in on this note. why do you think, if you don't mind answering this, it was considered, as you said, the most brutal in terms of lynchings?
Yeah.
Why? How do you go from, I kind of understand your soul, you got a soul, so on and so forth. And I'm sure the people that's doing the lynchings are the same people that, you know, a generation away from the nicer slave plantation owner, let's say.
Well,
So how does that work?
that's a really good question. Remember that by the Revolution, St. Augustine, Spanish Florida changes hands a few times. We go from Spanish to English, back to Spanish, and then American.
Yeah.
Well, by the time Florida becomes an American territory in the 1820s, right, we have a tradition of settlement here that made Florida part of the contiguous United States. Florida was one of the first colonies. I say colonies. Florida was one of the first states after South Carolina to secede from the Union. Florida was a very southernized state in terms of importing Southern customs. Now, the reasons that the lynchings were so high and the racial violence was so intense, Anthony, is because I think in more than any other Deep South state, because there was so much land available, because African Americans succeed financially. They were landowners. They were business owners in places like Rosewood, in places like Ocoee. And when African Americans assemble wealth and assemble autonomy and are outside of the white control, then whites, when they have an opportunity, are going to try to assert their superiority over Black people. So you're going to have instances of lynching in episodes, like I said, like Rosewood in 1823. So there's a lot of factors in Florida that made it very, very Southern in terms of its culture. It had one of the most repressive constitutions in 1885 when it came to establishing Jim Crow, disqualifying the Black vote.
So they went to the extreme almost.
Yes.
All right. How about this one? Who was the guy behind that? Who's the governor at this time that's leading this charge? Do you know?
There's a variety. Sidney Katz is a bad one. He is. His name was Sidney Katz, Catts. He was one that was, like I said, he was a white supremacist, and he was not against resorting to calling on white people to use extra legal violence to maintain the racial hierarchy. It's really interesting, though, as we go into Florida history, even beyond the 1830s, and then we get to someone like Harry T. Moore, who
don't know that name.
Harry T. Moore is an interesting individual. He is the first NAACP officer to be killed due to his civil rights activities. It's often said that Harry T. Moore is the first civil rights martyr. He and
you mean wife, in history?
One of the
in history. Man,
I would say that Harry T. Moore is one of the first civil rights martyrs because he is targeted because of his voter registration and because of his lawsuit to equalize teacher salaries in Florida. He was killed. He and his wife was killed on Christmas night of 1951.
1951. Wow.
1951.
Okay.
A bomb was placed under the bedroom of his home. He was killed almost immediately. His wife died a few days later. And it sparked national outrage, but we've forgotten the name Harry T. Moore as someone who was assassinated for trying to increase Black voter registration.
Yeah, but I mean, when you say 51, I'm thinking much earlier. There's got to be a bunch of intimidations, like that Elaine massacre and the Clinton massacre.
Right.
In particular, the Clinton massacre. I don't recall. You remember the years on that one?
I'm not sure what the Clinton massacre.
Yeah, the Clinton massacre.
When that happened.
Yeah.
I know Rosewood in Florida was 1923.
Yeah, Rosewood. Yeah.
So
Yeah, that was an incredible story. And so they go to the extreme down in Florida. And now you mentioned one incident, that incident there in 51. When is civil rights era? Is there an era years they call civil rights?
That's a really good question. The way that I teach the civil rights era, Anthony, is by what historians call the master narrative.
Okay.
And what the master narrative is basically the greatest hits of the civil rights movement, right?
Okay.
1954, Brown versus Board of Education.
Okay.
1968, the murder of Dr. King. That civil rights era is when significant campaigns and legislation was passed to deliver equality under the Constitution for all citizens. African Americans had been legally segregated. It was a struggle against legalized discrimination and its consequences after the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. So when we talk about the civil rights era, we're talking about Brown, 1954, separate in the field of education, not equal.
Okay.
Separate but equal, has no place, all the way to the death of the leading representative of the movement, Dr. King. Now, the long civil rights movement, if we want to go deep.
Yeah, right. That's what I was going to ask you about. That was my next question.
Hey, the long civil rights movement, as historians call it, is the period that stretches even into the 1800s, this period that I'm talking about with lynching and race riots.
What can we say right at the beginning of Jim Crow, right after the Reconstruction, the end of Reconstruction, what they call Reconstruction period?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's the idea, Anthony, that the civil rights movement didn't start in the 1950s and it didn't end in the 1960s.
Yeah.
The civil rights movement started as soon as Black people are free.
Yeah.
There is a struggle for equality. And you know what? There's a struggle for equality that's ongoing.
Yeah.
That's the long movement.
Sure.
How do we make this a biracial republic? That's what the civil rights movement is.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, because even in the Brown versus Board of Education, I've had somebody say there were, prior to that, a similar court case.
There were. Brown v. Board was a combination of several different schools.
That's what I heard. Yeah.
Yeah, Brown was just the lead. So yeah, there are a variety of reasons.
No, hold on. Explain that. What does that mean? He was just the lead. The others were at the same time and did not get a decision on until that one went, or how does that work?
The decision applied to them all.
But they were all going at the same time.
Yeah, they were all going on at the same time. It's called an omnibus. So you've got several cases, but the named case is Brown versus the Topeka, Kansas Board of Education. Now, Anthony, the reason that Topeka was the lead is because it was the only non-Southern school district. What the NAACP Legal Defense Fund didn't want to happen was for separate but equal to be struck down, and all these Southern schools said, okay, well, we'll just spend more money to make them equal, right? In Kansas, the segregated schools were just at the elementary school level. So it wasn't all schools, it was just elementary schools.
At the time of the case.
At the time of the case.
All right.
At the time of the case in Topeka, Kansas, the funding for Black schools was the same as white schools. The whole thing was Topeka, Kansas is going to be the lead case because we want to make this about the principle of segregation, not whether or not it's equally funded, not whether or not its teachers are equally paid. We want to make this case about the legality of segregation itself.
I got you.
That's why Topeka led the way.
I got you. And so let me ask you this: who comes up with that case? Is that are all these lawyers in agreement around the country? Were there independent efforts, and then someone saw that as how, or was that an entire strategy? How about that?
It was a strategy, and it was a strategy that was funded by the NAACP. They had a legal defense fund, legal defense department, right?
Yeah.
And one of the people who was really that spearheaded that effort was a man named William Hastie. He was the
Okay.
provost of the law school at Howard University.
Okay.
Charles Hamilton Houston was another person that was really involved, and Charles Hamilton Houston's most decorated student was a man named Thurgood Marshall.
Okay.
Thurgood Marshall eventually became the head of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund.
Okay.
And his idea was, instead of fighting school district by school district, we can combine them and launch one major offensive legally against segregated schools. And
Okay.
that's really how that came to be.
Okay. Okay. Let me ask you this: is there was education the first attack in civil rights?
No. The first real place where we see concerted campaigns against segregation is in public transportation.
Okay.
We see a variety of streetcar demonstrations. And, Plessy v. Ferguson came from a streetcar lawsuit.
And that's what years is that?
1896 is when the Supreme Court determined it. But starting in about 1890, 1892, we started to see states pass all kinds of laws mandating segregation in places of public accommodation. And the places where whites and blacks in the South came together most frequently was when it came to transportation, whether it's trains.
I got you there. I can see that.
Cars,
Yeah.
whether it's taxi cabs.
Yeah.
So there were many campaigns in the South against segregated streetcars. So no, schools weren't the first, but the NAACP Legal Defense Fund basically said that the place where injustice is most damaging is in the schools.
I got
so
you. I got you. Yeah. Okay. Now we rolling. And so, what is one of the, if you know this one, the significant court cases in transportation?
Ooh,
What flipped that to make it where segregation was illegal? And
we have to go all the way to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Civil Rights Act of 1964 changes everything.
But there's no court case before the 54 Brown versus Board on which integrated public transportation anywhere?
No, not until we get to the Montgomery bus boycott. The Montgomery bus boycott is going to have significant Supreme Court determination that seating on public transportation, segregated seating on public transportation was unconstitutional. I believe it was the Norris case is what it's called that reached the Supreme Court. So yeah, the Montgomery bus boycott both took advantage of and inspired legislation to integrate seating on privately owned buses.
Okay.
But yeah, where we get to the piece of civil rights legislation that's the most impactful is 64 with the Civil Rights Act. You can't underestimate the power of that piece of legislation.
Okay. How about this one? Now, prior to that, when is there the Voting Rights Act? There's the amendment. And what year is the amendment? But what year does the pressure succeed because of lawsuits that allow everybody to freely vote? When did that go?
65. 65 is the big year. That's the Voting Rights Act. That's when the Voting Rights Act.
So hold on, now you got me. Oh my God. And in the 50s, there were still voting issues?
Oh, absolutely.
Really?
We had it's not until the 1920s that the white primaries even struck down. The white primary is really, really important because the Democratic Party in the South claimed to be a private club. And as a private club, they could determine who their members were.
Okay.
Right? So there was a suit filed in 1923 to make the white primary unconstitutional. It was all right. The all right decision of 1944 is ultimately when it came up, but all right basically said that the making a political party a private club was unconstitutional for the purposes of keeping people out. Now, when Black people began to vote or trying to vote, you still had a variety of different literacy tests, and poll taxes that were there, you know. So yeah, there are mechanisms to prevent the Black vote all the way through 1965. And Anthony, we have not been a true democracy since. But since when people say that we've been a democracy since 1776, they're wrong. We haven't been a democracy except since 1965.
Yeah. So now, is there one other issue, civil rights-y issue, for lack of a better word, that, so we've talked about voting, we've talked about transportation, we've talked about education. Is there a housing vote court case?
The last piece of legislation there is the Civil Rights Act of 1968, and that pertained to housing, but it's one of the weakest of the civil rights bills, and as white landowners determined, it's one of the easiest to get around, because how can you prove racial discrimination in terms of equal housing opportunities? So you know, that's the shift, Anthony, from de jure to de facto forms of segregation. De jure segregation by law. You can change the laws, and the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act do that. But de jure segregation, de facto segregation is segregation by practice. It's the legacies of discrimination. So when we start talking about housing discrimination, and we start talking about residential segregation and redlining and redistricting congressional districts.
Right.
When we talk about police brutality and we talk about Confederate images, those are all de facto forms of racism because they pertain to practices.
Okay, because I got a guy on the channel who he filed a court case in Connecticut, John Britton, attorney John Britton. And he's everybody look at that video. He filed the case in Connecticut, and it's one of those school desegregation cases.
Yeah,
he says it's a part of the big three, so it might have been a big four or something like that.
Yeah, and that's the thing. There are many school districts in the South that still remain under a desegregation order because they haven't met the levels of integration that the federal courts have mandated.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure.
So, you know, resegregation is a real problem. And what that demonstrates, Anthony, is that the civil rights movement is not over. It continues. Freedom is a constant struggle.
Sure.
We have to be vigilant. So knowing our history and knowing where we came from helps us understand why we're in the position that we're in and why we need to keep struggling to make sure that this nation fulfills the promises that it makes to all citizens equally.
Yes. Everybody, watch this. Boom shakalaka, that's the last word. Oh my God. I got no more questions. We'll come back at it again. Did you all my viewers get that? That's the civil rights and why you need to know some history. Oh my, I thank you for coming on the channel. I hope I didn't scare you because it was a crescendo on me. It was a crescendo on me. This is what I do here at Strong Lens Spaces. I find these strong people and I come up with some questions and let them do the talking. Oh my God, thank you. This gentleman is an expert on this. He knows this stuff. You can see all the books. He read them all the books behind him. He done read all of them. He can quote them. thank you for coming on the channel. Strong Inspirations. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that like button, because I know you like it. Hit that notifications bell for when the videos come up, because I'm jamming. I'm doing 1 or 2, 3 or 4 or 5 a week, and I'm putting them out. It's not a Black History Month thing, but we celebrate Black history right now. And so to you, I say this with all sincerity. I want you to stay strong, stay safe, stay on your grind. I love what you're doing. You know, that is normally my closing, but before that, do you have books out? I forgot to ask you.
Yeah, my last book is titled Beyond Integration.
Okay.
The Black freedom struggle in Escambia County, Florida, between 1960 and 1980. So
yeah, do you don't have a copy nearby, do you?
That's the award I won for it.
Yeah, oh man, that's good.
There we go. Beyond Integration.
All right. Yeah, we see it. There it is. And
So
do you have a
go.
website? Can they get it off your website?
It's on Amazon.
On Amazon,
It's on
that's
Amazon.
good.
Yeah, and it was published through University of North Carolina Press. So
oh man, that's huge. Okay. Yeah, we got to put that plug in because we want everybody to keep following you on this note. Thank you for again coming on the channel. Thank you, everybody. With that, I'll say bye-bye. We out.